everyone. We are continuing our daily coverage 5 days a week of the coronavirus, the CCP virus. Again, broadcasting from my home here in New York, Queens. And we're going to be starting today by talking about some of the abuses we've seen taking place in China right now. I have a few updates for you on this. First, there's a video of a man who died in front of the government office in Tangshan County in China. Now, here's the story behind this. The family lost a member of they lost a family member to the CCP virus. The family went to go petition to the county government because the family member was not treated for the virus, the individual who had died. And while they were protesting, another member of the family died, fell on the ground. Local authorities allegedly would not even touch the body. At Shandong University, there was a student by the name of Zhang Wenbin. He posted a video on WeChat calling on the Chinese Communist Party to step down. And this student has now disappeared. He's become somewhat of a folk hero on the Chinese internet. The Epoch Times Chinese edition had an article on him. We have some quotes of what he said in his video, translated from Chinese. He said, quote, "This epidemic was a trigger that gave me the impulse to say that the Communist Party is out of class. What I feel most unacceptable is that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has blinded everyone's eyes through the education of lies and imprisoned people in high walls." After posting this video online, the video went viral in China. The individual has now disappeared. A 68-year-old retired professor in Beijing was arrested for posting online about the virus. And afterwards he posted photos of himself, of what the Chinese authorities had done to him. And you can see that his shirt's all torn, he has bruises all over his arms. Next we have a case in North Korea where, of course, there have been rumors that people get the virus and then suddenly disappear. There was a family of 5 who caught the virus, and they replicated the Chinese Communist Party's method of barricading people inside their homes. We've, of course, seen videos from China where authorities have even put metal bars on people's doors so they could not escape from their homes. Well, in North Korea, they did that to this family of 5. They nailed the doors shut, and all 5 members of that family died. You can find the article on HKET. It's a Chinese news outlet. Meanwhile, China Daily, one of the official state-run media of the Chinese Communist Party, actually now listed as a foreign mission of the Chinese Communist Party, is reporting on wildfires that are now spreading in 4 different counties in China. They note that Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, on Tuesday called for resolute efforts to curb the momentum of accidents and disasters in an instruction made regarding the forest fire in Xiqiang, southwest China's Sichuan province. The Chinese Communist Party is only reporting 19 deaths currently. Of course, we know how reliable the Chinese Communist Party's numbers are, so really, who knows? Meanwhile, as we've been reporting, the virus has not ended in China, and there have been a lot of new updates on this. Those of you who follow this show know. Those of you who don't, let me repeat some of the history of this. Long story short, the Chinese Communist Party was, the virus was the biggest issue in the country. It was all they were talking about. Everyone's on lockdown. Major cities all on lockdown. Factories closed. Don't go outside. Wear a face mask. You name it. Then what happens? The Chinese Communist Party finds that close to 1/3 of the businesses in China are about to go under if it continues like this. And within a few months of that, or a few weeks of that, another 1/3 of Chinese businesses were about to go under. And so Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, says, well, time to go back to work. We need to get back to work. We need to save the Chinese economy. And then all of a sudden, all the Chinese state-run media, all the propagandists, everyone who supports the system said, there's no more virus in China. The virus is over. Everyone go back home, go back to work. Now, this is from the Chinese edition of the Epoch Times. Of course, we have the largest independent Chinese news outlet. We're blacklisted in mainland China, but we do manage to get in there, making phone calls and having sources. Now, we conducted some interviews. We found that many patients who were discharged from temporary hospitals in Wuhan, being the epicenter of the virus, were sent to rehabilitation stations afterwards. And many people in those stations are still showing symptoms of the virus. In other words, they took people out of the hospitals, sent them to rehab station. Still have the virus, still showing symptoms, still cases. This is from CNA, a Taiwanese news outlet. It's reporting that the Chinese Communist Party is monitoring asymptomatic infections of the virus. And the Chinese Communist Party claims it's watching 1,541 cases and is claiming that among those, 205 are from people who brought the virus in from elsewhere. Now again, as we mentioned in the last video, the Chinese Communist Party right now, their buzzword internally is asymptomatic cases. In other words, people who have the virus but don't show symptoms of it. There is risk of a second wave outbreak in China, in addition to the fact that it never really fully went away. As they send people home from hospitals, as they clear out the temporary hospitals, as they send people back to work. People who have the virus are very likely going to continue spreading it, and they're at serious risk of a second wave outbreak, even though it never fully ended in the first place. This is another one from CNA, Taiwanese news outlet. It says the Chinese Communist Party is calling for more screenings for asymptomatic cases. This is a quote from that article. It says, the leading group of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, to cope with the new coronavirus epidemic yesterday, called for more screenings of asymptomatic patients with pneumonia in Wuhan. China's National Health Commission announced today that starting on April 1st, the reports, outcomes, and management of asymptomatic infections will be announced in the daily outbreak report. We probably won't see the true numbers abroad, as we have not seen the true numbers so far anyways. It's very likely the Chinese Communist Party itself is trying to collect internally the numbers of cases. Even then, it's unclear how effective that will be, because one of the factors you have when you're dealing with a totalitarian system like this, where the government stretches down to the basic levels of every part of society, local officials usually want to save face. They want to look good. They want to look like they're managing their areas well, and so they're typically not going to report the accurate numbers. In fact, as we've reported before, the Chinese Communist Party before was threatening local officials that if they reported too high of numbers of cases, that they would be punished. And so what happened? Local officials stopped reporting cases. They started saying there's no new cases. Now this is from the Epoch Times again. Now locals in China are not buying the Chinese Communist Party's narrative, and this is pretty interesting. Now we interviewed different residents in Hubei province. And, okay, long story short, the Chinese Communist Party has assigned every single person a health code. We mentioned before the Chinese cell phone accounts, how suddenly there were 21 million fewer cell phone accounts, and how that's kind of a red flag because you can't just get rid of your cell phone account in China. Your cell phone account is tied to your social security number, it's tied to your bank account, it's tied to your health code. And right now that health code in China is kind of your multi-pass, I guess you could call it, to get around the country. Now, people in Wuhan, they're saying that people with a green health code are allowed to travel unless they're from Wuhan, the epicenter of the virus. Now, people from Hubei province, where Wuhan is located, saying they're being forcibly quarantined while attempting to travel. In other words, people from Wuhan, the main epicenter, cannot travel still, but people from Hubei province can. But as they try to travel, they're being quarantined by the local officials. There's a video that came out from Qingdao that shows 101 passengers who flew from Hubei province and were held by local Chinese authorities. And again, this shows that the Chinese people don't trust that the virus has gone away, and neither do local Chinese officials. In other words, local officials themselves are rebelling to some extent against the centralized authority of the Chinese Communist Party. We typically don't see this happen. Meanwhile, there's a video online from Tongji Hospital in Wuhan on March 28, and it shows that the hospitals are still overwhelmed with patients, people suffering from this virus. In this video, there's an individual who was brought in for diabetes, and he's denied care because the hospital is full. The Hollywood Reporter also had something interesting to say, that while the Chinese Communist Party is saying they're opening up the whole country right now, they open things up and then shut them down soon after, within a week usually. The Hollywood Reporter is noting that movie theaters in China were reopened and then shut down. It says, quote, over the past 2 weeks, hundreds of movie theaters in the country had begun to open. No reason for the policy reversal was given, but insiders believe the government is worried about a potential second wave of coronavirus infections. In other words, this is even kind of spreading to the West now, that the Chinese Communist Party is fearing a second wave outbreak. And of course, they're opening things up, shutting things down soon after because of this fear. China Scope, which translates a lot of Chinese government documents, had something interesting recently as well. They noted that now there's estimated that in Wuhan alone, 40,000 of these urns or casks were distributed, or going to be distributed, which puts the number, of course, much higher than the 2,531 dead that the Chinese Communist Party itself is reporting. Here's a quote from that. It says, a person who requested anonymity told Radio Free Asia that Wuhan funeral homes processed about 28,000 corpses during the peak month of the epidemic. And this is a quote from the individual. Each funeral home could only report their numbers to the city, but were not allowed to share with other funeral homes. Again, 28,000 in 1 month in Wuhan. Again, the numbers are much higher than what the Chinese Communist Party is reporting. And other media are starting to figure this out as well. Business Insider had an article on this. It's reporting that the number of dead in Wuhan could be, quote, astronomically higher than the Chinese Communist Party's numbers. It says, quote, but some residents contest the official death toll, citing an increase in the shipment of urns to the city's 8 funeral homes. And it also quotes Radio Free Asia saying that, quote, the incinerators have been working round the clock. While this whole thing was going strong in China, when it was still a big deal, everyone was talking about the infections in China, the Epoch Times made phone calls into China to the cremation centers and found they were operating 24/7. According to Radio Free Asia, that's still happening. And Vice News actually had a pretty good report on this as well. They note about the way the Chinese Communist Party has twisted this whole thing around. How they're saying internally that the virus is over, things are done with, and they're using that narrative that the Chinese Communist Party successfully defeated the virus in their narrative, even though we know it's not true. They're using that for an international propaganda push, a soft power push. Now, Vice notes that the Chinese regime ignored early reports on the virus, silenced doctors that tried warning about it. They say, quote, but the Chinese Communist Party of China, CCP, is now seeking to portray itself not as the country that allowed the coronavirus to spread unchecked for weeks, maybe months actually, but as the country that has defeated the virus and is now on hand to save the rest of the world. It says, quote, to do this, the Chinese government has employed a unique mixture of tactics, including disinformation, soft power, conspiracy theories, and even a book that tells the heroic story of China's victory over coronavirus, all of which are designed to reframe the narrative around the virus and Beijing's role in allowing it to get out of control in the first place. And they note that among the various methods the Chinese Communist Party has used is silencing dissidents, as we've reported today, in fact, of this student and this retired professor and others, blocking information, spinning up state-run media, as we're seeing in the U.S. right now with China Daily and China Watch publishing inserts in U.S. publications, Global Times publishing on Twitter, you name it, spreading disinformation, promoting conspiracy theories, as we've seen with even some of the official Chinese Communist Party spokespeople coming out on Twitter. They gin up more conspiracy theories, and now they're starting to donate goods to other countries to try to make themselves look like the good guy in this. Meanwhile, we're going to some virus news from outside of China. Now, going to the United States, there's a bipartisan letter, mostly from senators, calling on HHS, Health and Human Services, to help bail out rural hospitals. Now, they say that small and medium rural hospitals are facing a financial crisis. Many of them have already been operating at a loss, and they're calling for financial relief for these hospitals. The letter says, quote, The administration must focus on ensuring the financial viability of these providers. Also, a couple big cases of the virus now. We have Google Vice President Vinton Cerf, who tested positive for the virus. Also, CNN anchor Chris Cuomo, brother of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. He's tested positive for the virus. He said he's going to be self-quarantining in his basement, where he's going to continue filming a show for CNN. Also, you all probably saw it already, but I'll say it anyways. The USNS Comfort, it's a Navy hospital ship, arrived in Manhattan on Sunday. They're docked at Pier 90. They were deployed from Norfolk, Virginia to help relieve some of the pressure on New York hospitals. Now, this ship is not going to be, at least allegedly, we'll see how things go, allegedly not going to be focused on treating patients of the CCP virus, this coronavirus. Instead, it's going to be helping relieve pressure on hospitals by treating people for other ailments. And this is needed. In China and a lot of places, it's very hard to get care if you have, say, a heart attack, if you have a broken leg, if you have other things other than the virus. As we mentioned in this broadcast, in fact, there was an individual who had a diabetic crisis, was taken to the hospital, and was denied service because the hospital was full. So hopefully this U.S. Navy ship will help relieve some of that. This ship has 1,000 beds, 80 ICU beds, 12 operating rooms, a blood bank, pharmacy, medical laboratory, CT scanner, radiology suites. It'll be providing 24-hour services even to patients in need of medical attention unrelated to the virus. Now, President Donald Trump had a quote on this. He gave a press conference at the naval station Norfolk on March 28th, and he said, quote, "The skilled sailors and civilian mariners aboard the ship will provide a critical surge capacity for the New York metropolitan area. Their mission will be to care for New Yorkers who do not have the virus, but who require urgent care." And something else related to the U.S. Navy, and quite concerning in my opinion. A U.S. Navy aircraft carrier has been asked to quarantine its crew in Guam because of the virus. This is a quote from USNI News, which is kind of a military news website. It says, quote, "The commander of USS Theodore Roosevelt asked U.S. Pacific Fleet leadership to take his crew off his carrier and send them all into quarantine ashore on Guam, as COVID-19 outbreak on the carrier spreads at an accelerating rate," according to a Monday letter obtained by USNI News. And they say, quote, this is from Navy Secretary Thomas Maudley, who told reporters last week, "No one on the crew will be allowed to leave anywhere into Guam other than on pier side. And we are already starting the process of testing 100% of the crew to ensure that we've got that contained." Now, with that said, let's move on to some comments, feedback from viewers. And again, folks, I read the comments. If you have questions you want to ask, if you have comments you want to leave, let me know in the comments below. I read them, I'll get to them. Some of them I'll answer on the show like this. Now, this is from CCP Weaponized Virus. It said, quote, How do you know CCP officials are lying? Their lips are moving." All right, that's pretty funny. This is from China Bill. He said, "I live in China. I utilize this channel to post the newest uncensored update in China." China Bill, real pleasure. Glad to hear. Please stay safe. You're doing great work. Appreciate it. This is from Ashton Gata. Said, "The people of China have a beautiful culture. I'm sorry your government sucks. You guys have a beautiful country and culture, but a terrible profit and power-motivated government." Yes, that is true. As you can see with some of my book choices, I'm a very big fan of traditional Chinese culture. I love traditional Chinese culture. The Chinese Communist Party is a totalitarian communist regime that under Mao Zedong alone killed between 50 million and 70 million Chinese people, that as we're speaking right now still brutally suppresses people who believe in religion, people who believe in democracy, people who want freedom. The Chinese Communist Party is the biggest abuser of the Chinese people. The Chinese people themselves are the biggest victims of the Chinese Communist Party. And it's a regime that tried wiping out Chinese culture during the Cultural Revolution. The ideology of the Chinese Communist Party is completely antithetical with traditional Chinese culture. And so yes, you're right. Chinese culture, traditional Chinese culture is wonderful. The Chinese Communist Party in no way represents the Chinese culture. It is a regime that has tried wiping out the Chinese culture. This is from James YTC. Said a foreign government can be sued in U.S. court. Just so some background. So in the last episode, we reported that there is a class action lawsuit filed in Florida against the Chinese Communist Party for the handling of this virus. I mentioned, I'm not too sure how they're going to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable. So a couple of you noted, as did James, that there are ways to hold them accountable. And so James wrote, a foreign government can be sued in a U.S. court if it can be proven they are directly responsible for the damages, and Chinese assets in the U.S. could be seized to pay the damages. And actually, that's a good point, because one of the traits of the Chinese Communist Party is that a lot of businesses are state-run. And when you have state-run businesses or businesses with at least some state ownership, it makes it a whole lot easier seizing their assets than, say, a private company that just operates from another country. This is from Daylog. We can expect a revolution in China and other countries in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic and global economic collapse. It's possible. We'll have to see. I don't think the Chinese Communist Party in particular is going to survive this incident. The Chinese Communist... Now keep in mind, this virus outbreak in China happened at the worst possible time for the Chinese Communist Party. It happened right at the height of the Hong Kong protests, when people in Hong Kong got together to stand up, first of all, against this extradition law that would have allowed the Chinese Communist Party to basically extend its laws into Hong Kong. They're supposed to have a one-party, two-systems system. Hong Kong is supposed to have a separate legal system from mainland China. The Chinese Communist Party was violating that, or at risk of violating that. Hong Kong people stood up against them and realized that the problem with the Chinese Communist Party went further than just that one law. And those protests turned into not just protests against that law, but into protests against the Chinese Communist Party itself. And the Chinese Communist Party was terrified that those protests were going to spread across China. And there actually were some protests in China, which the Chinese Communist Party shut down. Meanwhile, in Taiwan, around that same time, there were the Taiwanese presidential elections. Now, the Kuomintang, ironically, historically, the party that was opposed to the Chinese Communist Party has sort of become the pro-Communist Party. And the opposition party to that opposed the Chinese Communist Party, and they were the ones who won in a landslide victory. In other words, in Taiwan, landslide victory against the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party's systems of control were deteriorating within its own circles. And on top of that, the United States was in a trade war with China. Chinese factories, the Chinese economy were already taking a hit. Then this virus comes about right before the Chinese New Year, when there were over 3 billion travel arrangements in China. The worst possible time this could ever happen to the regime. And it happens in Wuhan, which is the main transit hub of all of China. Worst possible place this could have happened for the regime. And so, yeah, I don't think the Chinese Communist Party is going to survive this. They were already in a very difficult state. Now they're facing collapsed economy. They're facing a whole lot of angry citizens. They're facing people who've lost family members. They're facing people who've been locked down, persecuted by their own government, silenced online, you name it. They no longer believe the Chinese Communist Party. They don't trust its numbers. And I don't think it's going to make it after this. Next is from Colmac James. It says, Joshua, we really appreciate your honesty and correctness. It's a very welcome change from the mainstream media. I would like to do you a comparison between the CCP factions and the evilness of both toward the people of China, and what alternatives are available to the people of China, if any. Okay, so in China, at the government level, there are two rival factions. There's Xi Jinping, who's the head of the Chinese Communist Party. Most people think he controls all of China. He does not. There's another faction that controls some parts of the Chinese Communist Party system. That's the Jiang faction. Jiang Zemin was the head of the Chinese Communist Party 2 leaders ago. So there was Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, now Xi Jinping. Jiang Zemin came to power through the Tiananmen Square massacre. He also launched the persecution against Falun Gong, which was about 70 million to 100 million Chinese people who would, it's kind of like Tai Chi or Chinese yoga, you can think of it. A health practice. A lot of people did, it's called Qigong. A lot of people do it in the parks in the mornings, the slow movements you see them doing. A lot of people started practicing it, one, because it had incredible health benefits, and two, because it had good values, truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. The Chinese Communist Party declared that the ideology of Falun Gong, being honest, being kind, and being forbearant when facing hardships, was antithetical to the atheistic rule of the Chinese Communist Party, and they set out to destroy it. Now, the only person in the entire top-level Chinese Communist Party leadership who wanted to persecute it was Jiang Zemin. He said, find a reason to persecute it. They tried proving it was a cult. They said it's not a cult. It's good for the party. It's reducing medical costs. It's beneficial. It's making social harmony better. It's beneficial to the country. He said persecute it anyway. So the Chinese Communist Party launched a persecution against close to 100 million people. Re-education through labor camps, torture, murder, you name it. We found out now they're using Falun Gong practitioners as well as Muslim Uyghurs as well as some house Christians as living sources for organ transplants. These are people still alive, they cut their organs out and they use them for transplants. It's murder for profit. That is happening in China right now. That started under Jiang Zemin. Now, a lot of media, of course, they openly criticize Xi Jinping, but they don't criticize the Chinese Communist Party itself. If Xi Jinping were to step down, if he were to be taken out, one of two things would happen. Either Jiang's faction would take over, and they're arguably either just as bad, I'd say even much worse, or number two, someone within Xi's own faction would just step up and take over anyways. It would make no difference. The only way the Chinese people can be free from their system is if the Chinese Communist Party itself is done away with. If they get rid of the Chinese Communist Party. This system that was brought in under the Soviet Union into China and that, killed at least 50 million to 70 million people and is killing them to this day. That destroyed their culture, destroyed their beliefs, destroyed everything. Now, in terms of what the Chinese people can do as an alternative, I think that if they're going to move forward, they need to bring back traditional Chinese culture. They need to look and try to restore what was lost. Without the Chinese Communist Party, I think China would be a very good, very beneficial country to the world. Chinese people are very hardworking. They study well in school. They're good people. They have an amazing culture. Without the Chinese Communist Party, China would be a blessing to the world. Under the Chinese Communist Party, the Communist Party system regards the West as its number one enemy. And so I think if the Chinese people are going to get rid of the Chinese Communist Party, that will be the best thing, not just for them, but for the whole world. Now that said, folks, if you want to leave comments, questions, leave them in the comments below. I read them. I'll read some of them on the next show. And also, folks, I really need your support. If you can, please remember to like, subscribe, click the notification bell. You get alerts when our new videos are up. And we're going to be covering the coronavirus, the CCP virus, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. So please tune in. That said, we'll see you next time.